Hey everyone, welcome to the Stories of Language Learners. I'm your host, Charles. Today's guest is the creator and founder of Simple American Accent. His name is Will. He's a native English speaker who helps Brazilians to improve their accent and to sound more clearly and confidently. He also speaks fluently Portuguese, Spanish, and knows several other languages. Our conversation was so incredible. Truly, this was the deepest conversation that I have ever had on the show about language learning. We talked for about 2 hours, and that's why I'm gonna have to split our recording into 2 parts. So in part 1 we talk about learning language through immersion, using your passion and interest as an advantage to learn a new language, the right and wrongs of the learning process, the power of listening to a lot your target language, how to overcome perfection, the importance of learning new words through context instead of memorizing everything, the biggest mistakes people make when it comes to learning a new language. Will used to be really shy, and he shares how learning languages helped him to overcome his shyness. I had a wonderful time talking with Will. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure that you guys are gonna enjoy it as well. Hey everyone, welcome to the Stories of Language Learners. Today I'm so excited to have Will on the show. Hello Will, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
Hey, I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, I'm so glad that you accept being here, and just a little bit of a background story, how we ended up in this call. As always, I always like to ask the community of the podcast what they are struggling the most in their English learning journey. And I remember that one of the things that people asked me for help, it is with accent. And I thought to myself, oh, I know someone that I think it's the perfect guest to be on the podcast, because I've been following your content on Instagram for a long time. So I've been learning a lot, and I know that your content is totally based in helping people with their accent. So I thought I would try to invite Will to be on the podcast, and you kindly agreed to be here. So thank you so much. So could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So, I'm not a professor. I'll start out like that. I'm not your typical, I like to try to distance myself from that world a bit, even though I can still help you a lot. And there's nothing wrong with professors. I have a lot of friends who are professors. I recommend a lot of people. A lot of traditional methods can be good, but I've kind of come from a different background. So my background is when I was about 10 years old, for some reason, I got curious about foreign languages and I wanted to start learning them, and not just a little bit, not just passing a test, but I wanted to go as deep as I could. My goal was actually to become a native speaker. Whether other people believe that was possible or not, that's the goal that I had in my head starting at about 10 years old. So I started going from one language to another. There are certain ones that I went deeper in, but that was my whole background. It wasn't just based in theory. I started really diving in deep and trying to meet native speakers online, even as, a teenager, and started talking with people, Skyping with people, just doing anything I could, finding people at McDonald's in my hometown who were visiting from out of town who spoke Spanish, and getting up the courage to say hi because there was no one in my town who spoke Spanish. But when I'd find someone who was visiting, it was like, oh my God, I have to talk to them. And over throughout my life, this just kept growing and growing. And I ended up moving to cities and places and changing my life so I could have more contact with these foreign languages, not just online, but in person too. And so that's kind of guided my life since I was about 10 years old. And I became an engineer in college. I graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering. I worked in multiple companies for internships. I worked at Boeing as an engineer. Like, I've had kind of multiple lives, because about 2 years ago, I decided I wasn't happy with my Boeing engineering job, even though I was making good money and all this stuff. And I decided to quit. And I started this company, Simple American Accent, where I'm helping people, specifically focusing on helping Brazilians to improve their pronunciation and their accent in English. And other people can follow me too. But a lot of the content I do is in Portuguese, and it's specifically designed with Brazilians in mind. A lot of stuff may apply to other people, and I want to help more people in general, and not just for pronunciation and accent, but with language learning soon too, because I've learned so many different languages and accents, and I want to help people with that. Again, not just theory, but having really done it in my life and having had that transform my life personally and professionally. It's something I'm pretty passionate about. But yeah, for now, the main focus of that profile is helping Brazilians, especially those who already speak English and want to perfect their pronunciation and accent even more, to help them do that. But even if you aren't Brazilian, even if you don't speak English very well yet, you're welcome there. You're welcome to follow me, and I'll try to help as much as I can.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm so curious because you said that you developed this passion for learning languages when you were super young, when you were 10 years old. And I remember the first time that I was watching some of your stories on Instagram, and I couldn't tell that you were American.
Wow.
Yeah, because I can pick it up. Oh, this guy is a native English speaker, but for you, it was kind of hard because your Portuguese, it's really impressive. So, okay, can you share a little bit with us which languages do you know? Because you told me that you know a lot of languages. It's not just Portuguese, right?
Yeah. So, okay, English, I'm a native speaker, born and raised in the United States. And then Spanish and Portuguese are the two languages where I went deepest by far. I'm very good in both. Spanish is a bit rusty because I've been so focused on helping Brazilians for the last 2 years. I'm not speaking near as much Spanish. It's almost all Portuguese every day. But if we go back, 2 years ago and before, from the time I was 10 years old till, 25, 26, I'm 28 now, it was deep focus on Spanish. And I didn't document it very well. I didn't, have an Instagram for that. I was just doing it in my own life. But I went super deep. What you just said, you couldn't tell that I was an American. That happened to me all the time, even more in Spanish, because I went even deeper. I'm just now in Portuguese starting to get to where I was in Spanish. In Spanish, I went super deep. I had tons of Puerto Rican friends who I hung out with in college, joined the Puerto Rican Student Association, helped coordinate events, was constantly at parties, learning to salsa, hanging out. I'm very comfortable, and I have a whole lot of experience being the only white dude from the US in a room and everyone else being from a different country or a different region or a different whatever. I love that situation. I like being the outsider in the room and then trying to become sort of the insider over time, becoming more comfortable, starting to feel more at home in a foreign group, in a foreign land. That gets me so excited. It's so much fun. So anyways, I've done that with my Puerto Rican friends. I've done that with people from the south of Spain. I lived in Malaga, which is in the south of Spain, for 5 months. And I really focused again on learning the pronunciation and slang and all that stuff from there so that people from there would think I was from there. And I didn't do it 100% perfectly. It's tough in a long conversation, people realize, but I got good enough that sometimes I would confuse people. People would think, especially if there's alcohol involved or whatever, we could have a little conversation and it would take a while before eventually they'd be like, here's something. But we'd have this illusion for the first little bit of the conversation. And that was exciting to me. I wanted to keep increasing that time. So anyway, Spanish is this huge part of my life that I've kind of lost a little bit of touch with because I've gone so deep for the last 2 years with Portuguese. But anyway, Spanish and Portuguese, those are the two main ones. There have been other phases of my life where I went fairly deep into Dutch, went pretty deep actually. Didn't get perfect. I was roughly conversational. People would still maybe get frustrated with me because I wasn't good enough and, would switch to English. But if it was a friend of mine, someone who was more tolerant of, some mistakes, then I could actually hold a basic conversation in Dutch. That gives you a rough idea. And then Italian, I did a speed run, video game speed runs, super fast on Italian. I learned it I have to be careful not to overstate the claim here, but arguably I became conversational in Italian in 2 weeks. So we have to define what that means. I already knew Portuguese, I already knew Spanish, and I maybe learned a word or two of Italian or something, and it has a lot in common with Portuguese and Spanish. But I recruited a native speaker to help me, this girl who I was kind of attracted to, and she was kind of attracted to me, and we kind of flirted and did a lot of Italian. And then I went to Italy almost immediately after that because I'd been in Spain, and went really deep and was speaking on the street with strangers in Italian, 100%, native speakers of Italian in Naples and Rome who didn't know English. And I was able to do actual conversations, the basic conversation of hey, where are you from? Oh, well, that's cool. You're American. Why are you learning Italian? How are you learning? Why are you here? How long have you been? I learned all these common questions and was able to fluently have that first 5 minutes of the conversation. Then we get into some tricky topics that were harder, but literally within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, somewhere it was very short. So that was an experience in Italian. And then Russian, I've also gone reasonably deep into, not to the point of conversational, but I love that one because it's a different script, different letters, different, I started testing some of my theories to see if they still were true in this other language that has tricky grammar and pronunciation letters and whatever. And it was the same thing. I just did the exact same process for all these languages. It feels exactly the same. It's just the details change. The life of the people and the culture and the language changes. So it's kind of the same process for all the languages. I learned a little bit, I know some random rap lyrics in French and random languages. I just love learning languages. If I meet someone from a foreign foreign country, I will probably try to learn their language, at least like some basics. I'm probably going to want to impress them. Like I've done this with Hebrew, with Farsi, with like random languages that I haven't pursued deeper. I still have gotten a tiny little foothold just because I met some native speaker that I wanted to impress, that I wanted to have a better relationship with. So I learn a little bit and then I use it with them. And it's so much fun. It's really addictive for me. But yeah, the deepest languages, Spanish and Portuguese, and then a little bit in Dutch, Italian, and Russian.
Okay, so I'm blown away because, oh man, you know so many languages. And it seems to me that you are not just passionate about learning language, but also you are passionate to connect with people in using the language. This is awesome. And I think this is a huge advantage that you can have to learn language in a deeper way by connecting with people. And for example, in my personal experience, I had some trouble to get my English to another level because I'm a shy person and an introvert. So for me to get out of my comfort zone to initiate a conversation with strangers was super challenging. But yeah, I really admire that you have the courage and the will that you will learn, you will talk with people, you will approach them wherever they are. So this is awesome. Okay,
I used to be really shy, by the way, if I can add into that. I used to be very shy, very introverted. And it is language learning is one of the main things that pulled me out of that, out of my shell, that gave me this flexibility in my personality where I love being by myself. But now I also love being with other people. It's like a sun that's like, has gravity and it's pulling me into it. Like I want to experience the life. I'm so curious. I want to be part of the group. Like maybe that's from some childhood trauma or something where I like felt left out or, who knows, we could analyze it. But some part of me really feels pulled strongly to want to be part of the group, including different groups that are foreign groups. And I'm like, what are you guys talking about? I want to know, like, tell me about your life. Like, what's going on? How do you live differently? Because everyone has different patterns of thinking and speaking and living. And that's just endlessly fascinating to me. And it's satisfying when I like become closer and closer to that. And when I sort of get accepted more and more, I'm able to open those doors, literally like cross borders, hang out with people who are different from me and feel like I'm flexible enough in who I am in some way to successfully like have a meaningful relationship with them, which I can still be who I am at the core of me, but I'm maybe modifying some of the sort of superficial parts of how I communicate, how I express myself in certain ways so that I can have relationships in any language and any, so I just wanted to comment on that. I used to be super shy. Language learning helped pull me out of that for real in a very big way.
Okay, that's so fascinating and so interesting because I can testify because I feel like when I am speaking in English, some people said to me when we were talking in English, they would say, oh, I can't believe that you are a shy person. You don't seem like a shy person. But I don't know if, I think that maybe it's the fact that this is not my mother tongue. So I'm developing this another side of me. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like another person and I think that I am more confident speaking in English, but in Portuguese, oh man, it's really challenging. Okay, so why you started learning Portuguese? How was the process?
Let me take a brief detour back and let's start first with the first foreign language that I ever tried to learn, because I think that's a little quick, interesting story. It's where I first started. So the first foreign language I ever tried to learn was not Portuguese, and it wasn't Spanish either, which is what I started before Portuguese. It was actually Dutch, which is a super random language to start with. And I was like, 8, 9, 10, however old I was. I don't even remember. The reason I started learning Dutch was because of the video game The Sims. Do you know that game? Yeah. So I was playing that game, and I don't know if you're familiar, but they speak this made up language called Simish. It's not a real language. It's just like random sounds. That's the language that the Sims speak. Anyways, I heard them speaking this language and I was so fascinated. I was curious. Again, I wanted to know, what are they saying? I felt left out. I'm like, and just curious, not just left out in a painful way, but just like, oh, what are they saying? Like, I want to know. So my uncle was babysitting me and he's like half asleep. And I ask him, he kind of wakes up halfway. I ask him, hey, what language are they speaking? And he's annoyed. He's, whatever, he wants to sleep. So he's like, I don't know, Dutch. He just says a random language. He makes it up. He lies to me.
Oh, no.
So I believe him. And I go the next day or the next week, I go to the library with my parents and I get some cassette tapes and books and some like old language learning resources for free from the library about Dutch. And I start learning Dutch because I wanted to understand the Sims, even though it was not what they were speaking. So I studied, not perfectly, but I learned enough that I came back to my uncle like a week or two later and I told him, that's not Dutch. I learned enough to know that that's not what the Sims were speaking. And that was the beginning. That was the seed of everything. Because I didn't start learning Spanish or Portuguese or anything else till a little while later. It was very relaxed. I wasn't in any courses. I had no timeline. I had no deadline. There was never any homework for me in my beginning of this stuff. It was never about passing a test or getting a certificate, anything like that. It was very purely focused on, I just want to know what people are saying. I just want to participate. So it was very relaxed. I, just did whatever I want. I was a little kid. And eventually, for some reason, I connected with Spanish and I wanted to learn what some soccer players that I was playing with were speaking in Spanish or whatever it was. And again, I knew what to do. I went to the library. I got some books and cassette tapes because that's what I did with Dutch. And I started learning it. Eventually, I got annoyed with that method and I stopped and I gave up. I stopped learning Spanish for like 3 months because I was frustrated with some of those methods. But then eventually I came back because I wasn't forced. I didn't have homework or anything. I just came back naturally out of my curiosity that I had. And I started experimenting with other methods. And that led me to actually develop a lot of the things that I still do today. Was me, little 10, 11, 12, however old I was, just kind of creating my own methods of like, I want to become a native speaker. How do I do that? And literally at that time, I was like, I don't care if other people say it's impossible. I don't care what the existing methods are. I'm going to be like, I was going to say the Wright brothers, but in Brazil, it's different. The people who flew the first plane, before people flew in a plane for the first time, people thought it was impossible. Just because someone thinks something is impossible doesn't mean it is. So that's how I was, even at like 10 years old. It was like, I don't know if anyone has done this or not, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to do it, even if I'm the first one. And I'm going to be obsessive. I'm going to dedicate, do whatever it takes. For some reason, I connected with that. So anyways, eventually, if we fast forward, we're kind of jumping on in the story. But so Portuguese, I had already started to become successful in Spanish before I started learning Portuguese. The reason I started learning Portuguese was I played soccer. I loved watching the Brazilian international soccer team in 2002 to 2006. Ronaldinho, Roberto Carlos, Ronaldo, all those guys. I loved it. I was so excited to watch their stuff. I watched all the commercials, Joga Bonito, the documentary of Ginga. It was just fascinating. Again, it was the life. It wasn't just the language or a test or something. It was the life and the soccer and this cool stuff that I was like, oh, what are they saying? What's going on? I want to learn more about their lives and what they're saying to each other on the field and in this documentary. So I started learning Portuguese, just listening. And I got, my parents got me the movie Cidade de Deus, and I started watching that over and over. And then I got the music album Carolina by Seu Jorge, and I started listening to that. And I didn't know what they were saying. With Portuguese, I decided to try to take a more pure approach. I'm not saying that's good or bad or anything. That was just the idea I had in my head. I was going to try to learn like a baby, 100% like a baby. So to keep things organized, you asked, why did I start learning Portuguese? And I'm kind of wandering a little bit. I've mostly answered that. It was pulled by this curiosity about this soccer team. And then it evolved over time. One thing led to another. I met amazing Brazilian friends and loved the culture and all this stuff that pulled me in deeper and deeper. But the beginning of it, I just liked the soccer team. That was really the reason.
Awesome. It's so fascinating, your story, the way that you started learning language. It's kind of tragic as well, because your uncle said to you, oh, you need to learn Dutch because in The Sims they are talking in Dutch. So it's kind of, it's funny, tragic, but it worked.
What if he didn't lie to me? What if he said, I don't know, or that's Simish? What if I never developed that intense desire? What if I never went to the library and learned Dutch? Would I have learned Spanish? Would I have learned Portuguese? Would I be here today? Maybe it would have totally transformed my life. So I'm very grateful that he lied to me for better or worse. It worked out very well for me.
Uncle, if you are listening to this, thank you so much for lying.
Exactly.
Okay, so I remember the episode number 2 in the season 2. I interviewed teacher Du, and he told me a story that I think it's kind of similar. It's kind of a tragic story. He said that the starting point for him to learn English, it was because his dad bought a puppy, and his dad said, oh, you can just communicate with this puppy if you speak in English with this dog. And he was a kid, so he thought, oh, I need to speak in English. So he started to study in English to be able to communicate with
him. That's cute.
Fast forward for some years after, the dog died, so it was kind of frustrated because he couldn't speak with it. So it was a horrible, but at the end it was a happy ending story because nowadays he speaks English. So super well. And yeah, your passion for soccer, it was something, it was like an incentive for you to immerse yourself in the language. And I think I believe a lot in immersion, because in my English learning journey, I was in a point that I thought that I wouldn't be able to understand this language because I thought it was too hard. But then I realized, oh, a lot of people speak this language and they can understand this language. Why I can't? So I started to immerse myself into the language. I remember that I put my phone, my computer, I started to listen to music only in English, watch TV series and movies in English. And yeah, I think that this was a breakthrough in my learning journey, and I think this is very helpful. So okay, I will ask you these two questions at the same time so you can answer them. How did you learn English? Oh God, why am I with English in my head? Okay, how did you learn Portuguese? And then, do you think we can use the same approach to learn a lot of language?
I'll kind of try to give a short answer and then a longer answer to give some more detail. So the way I learned Portuguese was through the majority of it, especially the beginning, was just through immersion and actually preventing myself from looking things up, because it was an experiment. I wanted to learn like a baby. So I wasn't using dictionaries. I wasn't using subtitles. I was just listening. I was like watching the movie Cidade de Deus over and over and over without knowing what they were saying, without knowing what it meant. And just as an experiment, just to see what would happen. And my internet wasn't very good. So that's why I was watching the same movie over and over. And I listened to the album Carolina by Seu Jorge over and over and over. Again, not looking up lyrics, not knowing what he's saying, but just immersing myself, listening. And that's how it started out. And I think that was important. Like, I personally really enjoyed doing that. Maybe I'm weird. I think I am, but that's okay. I was obsessive. I was dedicated. Even with limited access to resources, I was using them in a very, very deep way. And my ear was developing familiarity with the patterns. I was starting to understand, because I already knew Spanish, right? And I could kind of like roughly understand some of the stuff, but not all of it. And based on when it's the movie, you can kind of see what's happening, and then you can hear what they say. And you can sometimes start to create little hypotheses, little like, oh, maybe they're sort of saying something that means kind of like this or that, but I'm not sure. And you start kind of having like a placeholder, like, I don't know for sure what they're saying, but it might be something like this. And I started kind of developing that throughout the movie. And so I'd hear the form and I'd imagine the function. Like, I'd see what's happening in the context and the situation, and then I'd associate the sequence of sounds that I was hearing, which I would try to imitate out loud. Like, you know, whatever's happening, I'd try to imitate it out loud. And even if I didn't know what it meant, I would start associating it with what was happening in that moment in the movie, and just kind of developing that. But over time, I started maybe loosening the restrictions a little bit. You know, I'd probably look up a word here or there, or maybe turn on subtitles for a minute and then turn them off. But I kept this idea of heavily focusing. The main focus was on massive exposure to the language, in the native language, and not using my other languages as a crutch to help me as a shortcut. Nowadays, I don't know if that's, you know, the best way. I think there's ways to mix things in. You can look things up, learn some grammar at the beginning. Like, there's ways to mix everything together, and maybe that's a more effective, efficient learning path. But I'm really happy that I tried the pure approach. And actually, I want to reference, there's a cool website, a cool resource that if you guys haven't heard of it, if you haven't heard of it, you might want to look it up. And it's kind of old now, but it was something that inspired me back when I was doing this. And it's called All Japanese All the Time, AJATT, AJAT, or I don't know if people pronounce it that way. I didn't do all of it, but the basic idea of it was what intrigued me. It fascinated me. It was this idea of basically, if you just listen to, you know, Japanese was the example here, but any language you want to learn, you just listen to Japanese all day, every day, and you just do this like for weeks and months and years. What do you think is going to happen? Like, you're probably going to get pretty good at the language, even if you don't study any grammar, you don't learn any of the vocab or rules. So in All Japanese All the Time, I think they added some of that stuff in. You'd like do spaced repetition, like to memorize vocabulary and phrases. I didn't really do that. I just took the idea of like, how do babies learn? They just listen to a ton of the language. They don't have like a cheat code or a resource to look things up and know what they mean. They just got to figure it out. So I'm like, why can't I do that as an adult? Even if it's not the most efficient pathway, maybe it'll be more pure, and maybe I'll be more like a native speaker, because that was my goal, remember, to become a native speaker. So I wanted to try doing it that way. So this is kind of the rough idea of how I learned Portuguese, though. It's not necessarily how I recommend, though, to learn languages, especially if it's your first foreign language that you're learning. So yes, I think any process that works for one language will probably work well for other languages. That's the first thing to point out. If you've successfully learned a foreign language to the point of actually being able to use it, being conversational, you could probably do the same things in another language and have similar success, most likely. likely. So I think in general, that's a good thing to think of. But yeah, I would, and I do change things a bit. So when I learn a new language now, the way that I do it is still heavily focused on immersion, on contact with the language. You don't have to be in the country to do it. You just do it digitally. You do it remotely, virtually, using content. Even if you don't have access to native speakers to have a conversation with them, you can still simulate a lot of that just by listening to them, listening to tons of content. You can read some too, but my main focus is on listening. Because again, I'm thinking, how do babies learn? Sound is primary. You learn to write later, but you start out listening. So that's what I try to do. So I position that immersion, that contact as the core, the foundation of everything. That's, 80% or whatever. But then I do supplement. Now I do help accelerate things. I give myself a structure based on looking some things up strategically and getting sort of a minimum viable grammar if I need that. Sometimes I skip that. And there's some amount of, strategy and things, but I view all of that as sort of supporting the immersion to help accelerate, to help guide it, to help get me faster results and quick wins that I can feel good about. But still, those things are not the core. I see a lot of people focusing on grammar endlessly, conjugation tables, memorizing vocab, sort of trying to calculate the language like it's something mathematical. But a quote from the all Japanese all the time era was, you don't learn a language, you get used to it. And that still is something that heavily influences me, which is language isn't just this conscious thing where you are going to analyze everything and memorize every rule and then connect them together like a equation. And then that's how you become fluent. It's more like a dance or learning to walk or something. Like it's almost this physical, like this movement, like it's these connected flows, fluency, right? It flows. It's not just something that you analyze every detail. It's something that you have to practice and develop almost muscle memory or body or brain or mouth or ear memory flows, whatever you want to call it. It's this dynamic. It's like the difference between a picture and a video. You can look at a picture and it's like this sort of this moment, but a video is this like flow, like a bunch of pictures connected together with audio too. And it's like one thing leads to another. If you ever play a musical instrument and you start playing piano, you might memorize a song and you can play it from beginning to end. But if you hit a wrong note in the middle, if you mess up too much in the middle of the song, you might not be able to continue because you might get so lost that you're like, oh, I don't know how to restart where I'm at. You might have to start at the beginning again because your memory of that song isn't just like a photo where you like know every individual point and that's it. You don't have to know that. All you have to do is enter into this flow at the beginning and that flow carries you through to the end of the song. So you might not be able to start at random points of the song. You might have to start at the beginning and then the song pours out of you. And to me, that's kind of how language is. You can develop more entrance points along the way, but it's still this flow. It's this subconscious, this because of all this exposure you've had, this practice, it sort of just flows out of you. And with that, you might have like a different personality that flows out of you too, or whatever it is based on how you've been exposed to it in the past. You're training these habits is kind of how I think about it. Whether or not this is scientifically supported, I don't know. We all probably should keep researching this more. This is how I think of it and it's useful for me. So I would add in this is what I would do and what I do in new languages is like if I'm going to learn Korean right now, I'd go Google or YouTube and learn like maybe, the top 10, 100, whatever, like some of the basic phrases that I need to know. I don't really care about numbers and colors because I probably don't need those for a minimum viable conversation, which is how I think about it. I think just what do I need to know? I want to talk to people and have fun. Like, let's make that happen as soon as possible. So I probably don't need to know all the numbers and colors. I'm just going to skip all that stuff. I just want to learn how to like have a conversation. So I'm going to learn things like just kidding, haha, like I don't know, like how do you say blank, like, thank you or cool or like things that I'm actually going to say in a conversation. I could even start having a conversation in English with a native speaker and start adding in Korean words as I learn them. Like, say a stupid joke and then say just kidding in Korean, or they say something that was awesome and then I can say like awesome or cool in Korean and like start adding it in and like have this whole like energy exchange, like relationship communication that is transitioning into the language. And man, I'm talking so much, but I guess that's kind of the point. So does this kind of make sense so far? It might be totally random and all over the place.
No, it makes totally sense, and I can relate to so many things that you said because I love your approach. I felt the same way in my English learning journey through immersion. I did a lot of things like you did, like watching TV series, movies, and trying to understand the language. Not because I had some traditional experiences in the traditional way doing courses, and I remember that a lot of times things that I was learning, I would never use that in real life. Like I was reading a story about a monkey in the forest or something like that.
Yeah, you don't need to know the word florist.
Yeah.
When you do, or if you do, you can learn it, but that's not where you start.
Yeah, and also
so specific.
Sometimes it's so frustrating just to learn grammar and then doing doing exercises.
It kills it. It takes the life out of the language.
Yeah, so I wasn't motivated to continue learning through this method. I don't regret. I think it was important for me to build like a foundation, but nowadays I have this clear path in my mind if I want to learn a new language. And one of the top things on my list it is immerse myself. I know if I am going to learn a new language, I will immerse myself in the language, to try to listen, to watch, to everything as much as I can to be in contact with this language, because I think that the way that our brain works is kind of fascinating. I remember when I first started watching TV shows in English, I couldn't understand, but after a while I was able to understand without reading the subtitles. And I remember also when I was younger, I was a big fan of watching animes. Animes? I don't know the pronunciation.
Yeah,
Anime?
I'd say anime. It's very similar. You're close enough.
Okay, anime. In Japanese, and all of the sudden sometimes I could understand without reading it.
You know Japanese too? Enough to watch anime?
No, like nowadays I don't think that I could understand, but some little phrases.
Yeah, little bits.
Yeah, little bits.
That's amazing. That's so satisfying. I think some people get so focused on the big win, like the big result of I want to be 100% fluent, perfect, that they don't even notice those little wins along the way. But for me, that's like the most exciting thing, because when I notice those little wins, I know I'm on the right path. Like if I just understand like one word in a show and I understood 0 words yesterday, I'm like so excited. I'm like, hey, like I understood a word. Like that's huge. And I know it's going to build and accumulate over time. But I think some people almost like don't even like value that. They're like, they've just beat themselves up. Like I'm not good enough yet. Or maybe they think they're going to learn in 3 months and they're not going fast enough or whatever. But for me, no, it's very much like a long-term focus. And I know I'm going to get there because it builds. Like if I just keep going, it builds. So that's exciting to me to hear that you were motivated, that it was a positive thing for you when you even just like a couple words, like you weren't understanding the whole show, just like little bits.
Yeah, and if I would give an advice to someone who is trying to get better and to go to the next level, I would say this takes time. It is a process. And fortunately, it's not like, oh, I will learn today and tomorrow I will have a full conversation for 2 hours. So it's step by step, little by little. It takes time. As you said, there's no mathematical formula. So yeah, it really takes time. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people making when it comes to learning English?
There's a lot. And to me, it's not like my answer is not going to be specific things like, oh, you're mispronouncing this letter or forgetting the word it. Like all of those things are details. The main mistakes are more about the process or the mindset, because all those details can be fixed. All those details will fix themselves almost naturally over time. You'll figure those out. The biggest mistakes are sort of more strategic or mindset or process-based things that hold people back. But some of the main things, one, we already covered, focusing too much on rules, trying to calculate everything, trying to approach language like it's a very conscious, mathematical, perfect thing that you can just sort of memorize everything and then you'll be fluent. You don't memorize your way to fluency. You sort of live your way to fluency. Like it's not a picture, it's a video. It's like this flow of connected things, and it's not just conceptual, it's experiential. You have to live it. You have to be in contact with a lot of the language over time, develop so much familiarity. You don't learn a language, you get used to it. It's not just conscious, it's subconscious in a very big way. Now, of course, there are conscious parts. There are things where you, yes, do want to learn maybe some grammar rules, some names of concepts, some, learn vocab and memorize it in a very direct, specific way. Sure, you can do all that stuff. But to me, that's this supplemental extra sort of stuff that accelerates or guides the rest of it. Because the rest of it is what really matters. The rest of it, the core of everything to me is that massive immersion, that massive exposure, contact, interaction with the language. Even if you don't have direct contact with native speakers and you're just listening to content, on your phone, on YouTube, on Instagram, podcasts, whatever, if you just pretend that you're a baby, whatever, just immerse yourself in that world. You can use subtitles, you can look up words, you can do whatever you want, right? There's not just one way to learn a language. You can adjust any of these things based on what you prefer. But I really think it's pretty much essential to get massive exposure one way or the other to a ton of, listening to the language. Ideally, I really think not just reading, but listening to tons of the language is so important, and not just getting caught. So I'm kind of covering multiple mistakes in here. So let's break it down. Number one was not just rules, calculating, conscious, subconscious, learning, studying, take all those words and set them to the side. Those can all still happen, but they're secondary in my view. The core, the primary focus should be on immersion, subconscious, familiarity, contact, maybe even throw in imitation in there, experiential instead of conceptual. All these things where it doesn't matter if you know the technical name for what you're doing. It doesn't matter if you know how to teach what you're doing to someone else, if you know how to describe it on a conceptual level. All that matters is being able to do it. Think about how you in your native language, you probably can't explain the reason or the history behind every little thing that you say in the language. It just comes out of you without thinking because it's these habits, it's this video, it's this trained, flowing, dynamic process that gets triggered by one thing or another, and then it just flows out of you in a way that you're largely not calculating, you're not tweaking everything in a conscious way. So to me, foreign language, we can take a path that's a little more calculated and mechanical at times, that's fine, but we got to have that core, and over time, that's the goal, is to have it flow out of us just like our native language does. And we get closer and closer to that over time. Again, take whatever path you want. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I really think that the primary focus should be massive immersion, sort of subconscious familiarity, not just conscious, studying of rules and that kind of thing. So that's really the biggest one. Another one is don't just think about being right and wrong or being perfect. This will block a lot of people where they won't speak or they won't listen because they feel frustrated because they have this big, high, crazy goal, or they have this really limited view of how language should be, and everything has to be perfect and right. Just like, some professors, some people get really, really rigorous, really strict about what is right versus what is wrong, to a point where it doesn't even accurately represent all the variety of how people speak around the world in different countries, different regions. For instance, in the US, this is sometimes a problem. This can be a controversial topic, which is exactly why it's an important one. Looking at how white people speak versus how Black people speak. To put it very simply, we can obviously add more nuance, but in a way, the way that white people speak, certain kinds of white people at least, became sort of the standard, the reference point, what is considered correct English, what gets more social status, more value, what is used in, science and communication and day-to-day life and politics. Like there's kind of the standard American English or general American English, like this kind of model that we have, which is valuable, and you should probably learn it because it can unlock access to resources, can change how people judge you, perceive you, etc. But it's not the only right way, and it's not linguistically better. It's just societally better. But the point is, there's many different flavors of language. So I want you to, instead of thinking about right and wrong, what I encourage you to do is, yes, there can be certain standards that are valuable for you to learn, and you should try to go towards those if it suits your goals. But let's take a minute and forget about right and wrong for a minute. Instead, think about utility, think about your goals, think about effectiveness, think about my favorite, pattern alignment. So it's not just right or wrong, it's who are the groups and the communities and the people that you want to interact with, and how do they speak, and what are their expectations about language and speech. And this works for any language, any accent, anywhere in the world. This is a much more flexible model of thinking about it, because now you can think, oh, I want to do business in Scotland, so maybe learning the American accent and these patterns, that isn't as useful for my personal situation. Maybe I want to start watching content from Scottish people, Scottish businessmen. I don't know, like that's where my mind goes. I would work backward from the goal. Everything is going to be based around that. And it's, again, not right or wrong. There's no judgment that's required about what is right and wrong. It's just based on goals and utility, effectiveness. And it very much is going to vary depending on your personal situation. So to me, it comes down to goals and pattern alignment. So anyways, moving back to the idea of mistakes, try to step beyond, yes, right and wrong, that does have some meaning. And we ultimately come back to, standards and things like that. But we need to open up that definition first. We need to open our minds to get away from right and wrong, to give us some more flexibility so that we can adapt to our audience. We can adapt to our environment. And we would do this in our native language too, right? We're going to speak differently with our grandma than we're going to speak giving a presentation on stage, then we're going to speak with our friend at a bar, just joking around. Like we're going to adapt our language and speech patterns based on the demands of the moment. And I think we should do the same to some extent. And we can argue about the details, but the idea still holds based on your communication goals. So think about your goals, reverse engineer that, and think about pattern alignment instead of just being right or wrong. So as you're acquiring a new accent, a new language, imagine that there's a target and you're getting closer and closer to the target. Like earlier you said anime, but you said like anime or something a little different, right? So the target, if you want to sound like how I say it, which is not the one right way, but it's a target that you could choose, you did something that was different. So you were off of the target. You weren't totally off of the target. You were actually pretty close. So if we talk about pattern alignment, like here's the pattern, the target, and you're already pretty aligned. Like you're close to it. But again, that's not inherently good or bad. That's the key point here. It's not just right or wrong, good or bad. It's targets and pattern alignment. So if you want, you can keep training. That's absolutely physically, technically possible to be able to say that word exactly like a native speaker, because you have the same, tongue, mouth, lips, like unless, someone who's listening has some sort of significant difference in their anatomy or something that limits them. It's physically, we have the same hardware, right? We just got to change our software, conditioning, our programming, train ourselves to use our mouths, our instrument in a different way, but we still have the instrument. We can make the sounds of any language we want. We can connect them, and we can, if we train enough, if it's valuable to us, we can get within that tolerance. So that's part of the goals too, is how close do you want to be? Do you want to sound exactly like a native speaker? Or maybe you don't want that, or you just don't care about that. And then your goals can be different. And then it might just be, I just want to be clear. I just want to be understood. I want to be confident, whatever it is. And then your tolerance, your goal isn't, as tight. It's more like this. You just got to get your pattern alignment within that instead of within this. That's the basic idea. And so for every, whether you're going to Scotland or to New York or wherever you're going, your goals, your targets, they can shift, and you can develop flexibility and control in sounds and language to adapt your communication to each of those environments if you choose to do that. So that's a mistake. Right, wrong. Man, I'm giving a lot of detail. Hopefully it's helpful for people, because it's kind of going all over the place. Is this making sense so far? Because I gave 2 mistakes. I have some more, but those are 2 big ones that I see people make.
Yeah, I took some notes here because some of them that you mentioned, I think it's very interesting because I went through this process myself. So, for example, about memorization, this is something that I realized that I don't have to memorize every single word. I just need to practice and to be able to communicate as a whole phrase, or answering a question that someone asked me, not memorize every single word. Because if you ask me something that I learned in high school, I cannot answer you, because at that time I remember that I would try to memorize everything. So I can totally see that memorizing, it's not a solution.
So I view it as, we can try to just memorize words like out of context, like in a list or whatever. Or what happens more in real life, I would say something more practical, is you want to think about habits and how the right word is naturally going to get triggered by the context. So you don't, like you said, you don't have to memorize every word. You don't have to be able to say every word in English randomly right now and make a list. All you need to be able to do is have them pop up naturally in your mind at the right moment. So if we switch topics, if we start talking about physics or finance or whatever thing, like suddenly that's a whole different network. It's a whole different little mini world within the world of English communication. And within that world, it's now a new context. We're going to have different topics, different words, different phrases, different ideas. So I kind of think of our brain, or how we learn languages, or in our body, or however it's happening, as sort of this network of things that are clustered together and connected, but there's these clusters. And so we kind of get into a mode. Like if I'm with my Puerto Rican friends, I'll go into my Puerto Rican mode, and all of my ways of speaking and whatever will start moving more towards that, and I'll kind of access that. And if I'm hanging out with my Brazilian friends, it'll start like, I'll go into that mode. It's not like I'm like translating between these 2 worlds constantly and making connections and like living in all these worlds at once. It's more like, no, again, like I'm different when I talk to my grandma than when I talk to my friend at the bar. Like they're kind of different parts of me, like different areas that I access. And so the memorization part, it doesn't even feel even like relevant to the conversation in a way. It can supplement and stuff, but like the way that things enter into us is important. So I think if we're learning things through context, like Youglish.com, for example, and we look up a word, and then we can hear a bunch of examples of people actually using that word. And then we have all the context, the story, the moment, who said it, how did they look, how did they sound, what emotions were there, what did they say before they said that, what was the topic, why did they say it, like all this, the whole story, the arc, the emotion, like all of that is extra information. It's context. And that is so much better for learning that word that we wanted to learn, because we can get so many real life examples. We don't just memorize some dictionary definition. We actually see and live in a way. We live that with them through the examples. We enter that moment, we enter that room with those speakers, and it becomes part of our memory, part of our life, our lived experience. So some moment in the future when we want to say that word, in some way, I feel like we sort of channel that, like it comes out of us, like all of that experience, even if it was virtual through content, gets triggered in our memory. Sometimes when I'm speaking Portuguese, I almost feel like I'm one of the people that I heard say that phrase before. Like some, person that I watched a lot of content, so Jorge or Victor Damasio or whoever, like some mentor, some person I like watch a lot, I almost feel like it's them speaking through me in a way, if that makes sense.
Yes, this makes totally sense, because I've been listening this podcast. I have to listen to this podcast a lot because I edit and then I listen again and again and again. And sometimes I say some things that I have no idea where I learned how to say that.
Exactly.
And sometimes I'm listening to a podcast where a person say the exactly same thing, and then I realized, oh, I say this because this person say this, and I listen to this person a lot. So yeah, the way that our brain works, it's kind of incredible. So okay, I think we went to a lot of places here. So
real quick, I just want to give. I was thinking, have you ever watched Joe Rogan's podcasts? Joe Rogan.
I heard about it, but no.
You should watch it, because what's cool about it, and your podcast does not need to be that. Every podcast is different, right? So Joe Rogan's podcasts are long form podcasts. They're not 20 minutes. They're like 2 hours, 3 hours, like long. And I love that, because you get beyond, everyone has their automatic answers. They tell the same stories in every interview. They say their thing, whatever. But when you go for a long time, you can go beyond that. You can get deeper into how they think. And so there's something really cool about that. Again, you do whatever you want. Every podcast is different, has a different function. But like, even if it's just for this episode and we go a little bit deeper than you normally do, like, I love going deep. And not everyone that listens maybe will listen to the whole thing, and that's fine, right? But some people are going to love it probably and listen to the whole thing, just like I do with some of Joe Rogan's podcasts, because I'm so interested in the person he's interviewing. I will start thinking, wow, it's like 2 hours. I don't have time for that. But then I'll like, okay, this is good. And I'll like literally like watch the whole thing.
Yes, I'm loving this conversation, and I am 100% sure that people are gonna love it, because I know that you guys were asking me to bring some native English speakers, and we were so kind to be here. So yeah, let's talk as much as we can, and I know that you guys will enjoy. And I know if you don't listen this episode like in one day, you can stop and then continue the other day. This is the cool thing about podcasting. It's not live. You can go back and listen to it again.
Were you going to move on to the next question?
I just have one point here about the mistakes that I wrote down.
Perfect. If I can at least, even if we don't go into detail, I'd like to at least list just like the name of some of the other mistakes.
I wrote down here perfection, because I struggled with perfection in the beginning of my learning journey, because I started learning English back in 2015, but only in 2018, like 3 years after, I started to use the language actively, because I got into a point that I was able to understand, but I couldn't speak. So I felt that I had some kind of problem. If I really wanted to use this language, I needed to speak. I needed to open my mouth and talk with people. And I joined a program called Cambly, and that was a breakthrough for me, because I had no other way. I needed to speak in English if I wanted to be understood by these people in this program. So, and as you mentioned, sometimes it's like you need to shift your mindset. Nowadays I am aware that I don't have to be perfect in everything. Even in Portuguese, I don't speak perfectly Portuguese, and I will never will. So when we start to think in this way, we won't be afraid anymore of perfection or waiting to know everything before starting to use the language or to speak the language. So guys, if you struggle with perfection, just go for it. Immerse yourself in the language. Try to use the language as much as you can, even if you think that it's not enough. But yeah, we need to commit mistakes if you want to improve. And yeah, don't let perfection go in your way. Okay, you can list, or you can finish the list of mistakes that you have.
Sure. So just to add a comment to what you said, and then I'll list the other mistakes here. I think perfection is a way of living in fantasy sometimes. I love perfection in a way. Like, I've spent so many hours like at a whiteboard, just like creating like, all these ideas, writing things down, feeling like I'm discovering hidden truths of the universe and getting goosebumps, and just like by myself, in a notebook or talking out loud or at a whiteboard, just like going deep in all these concepts and ideas. And I think that can be really valuable, and it can feel really productive. And in a way it is. But the risk with all this stuff about like being intellectual about things and concepts and perfection, and to me, it's all kind of connected. The risk with that is, I did this with starting a business. Actually, I was really conceptual about it, studying, taking all these courses, feeling like I was making progress. But then I realized after like a couple years, I'd spent a bunch of money, and I had taken tons of courses and filled notebooks with notes and ideas and plans, but I didn't have anything to show for it. I hadn't made a sale. I hadn't made any money. I hadn't started creating content. I hadn't actually really done anything. Like, I'd done stuff that still would matter eventually, would help me now, and it still helps me, but I was kind of doing it in the wrong order, I think. Because the same thing in language, there's often things that we can do that feel kind of good, that feel like we're making progress, it feels productive, but it's not actually moving us for real closer to the goals. Like, there's a difference between being on the sidelines, like on the side of a soccer game or football game, whatever. There's a difference between being on the side and just like watching it versus actually getting on the field and playing it. Like if your dream is to do something, at some point you got to go out on the field and you're going to get dirty. Maybe you're going to get injured. Maybe you're going to look like a fool and trip, and a whole stadium of people is going to laugh at you. I don't know, like, but you got to get on the field one way or the other. Like you can't just stay on the sidelines dreaming about it, because life is short. You end up, to be morbid, but it's important to think about it sometimes, is we're all going to die. Life's short. And if we spend too much time in perfectionism, staying on the sidelines, just learning grammar and vocab endlessly and endlessly, never trying to talk with a native speaker, never actually spending time imitating out loud or listening to content, never doing sort of these core fundamental things, then it's sort of just like, it doesn't really show result. We're going to end up with regret later in life because it's not going to actually move things forward. So I always encourage people to take the most direct path possible. If you need to do some other things at the beginning, whatever, take whatever path you want. It's your life. Experiment, try many different things, be a kid, play, color outside the lines, do whatever. But at some point, there's a direct path that you're probably avoiding. You're probably ignoring it out of fear and perfectionism. So in business, that looks like ask someone to pay you money. Like forget all the other stuff. Make an offer. Like, hey, will you pay me $10 for this thing? And they say no. And you're like, ah, shit. But you asked. That's the key thing. A lot of people are just so scared of the no or the rejection or the laughter or whatever it is that they never take the action, and they do a bunch of other stuff to feel good, but they never actually do the thing, the one direct thing that they need to do. So in business, that's making offers. Ask people to pay you money. Doesn't matter. It can be $1,000, $10, $1 million, whatever. People can say no. That's not the point. Like it doesn't matter whether they say yes or no in a way. The point is to enter into the arena, to get on the field. You got to get on the field. It doesn't matter how many no's people tell you, how much they laugh, whatever. The point is you're going to be actually doing it. And if you keep doing it enough, the quality will happen through the quantity. Like the more no's you get, the more experience you're going to get. You either win or you learn. Same thing with language. The more you start listening and imitating and maybe trying to have conversations even with native speakers, even if you don't know the language yet, you hop on the call and it's awkward and you don't know what to say. Maybe it goes terribly. So if it's your first language you've ever learned and you struggle with confidence, maybe that could be bad for you, because you'd be like, oh God, if you tell yourself a story of I'm terrible, this was bad, I can't learn, then yeah, maybe you should take a little bit of a slower approach, build up to it, sort of calmly. Like me now, if I'm going to learn Turkish or some random language, I'm going to get on the call with a native speaker like immediately. I've done it actually. I did it with Turkish. I literally didn't look at any content, didn't look at anything. I just went on to Hello Talk, the app, and messaged like 20 Turkish native speakers. And I got on a phone call immediately with a Turkish person. I picked someone who already knew English. So I knew that we could use English, and I knew it would be beneficial for them because they wanted to speak English. So we would both be getting value, win-win. But literally got onto a call with a Turkish girl for, it was like a 2-hour call, and we spoke mostly in English. But what I did was I started asking her, what are the key words, not just words, but it can be a word, it can be a phrase, just key little pieces of form, as I call it, that will enable me to accomplish some function, some communication function. So again, it was like ridiculous things, like something that's charged with emotion and energy and could even be offensive. Like that's more fun for me than just like, hi, how are you? Great. And you? Pleased to meet you. Pleased to meet you as well. Where is the library? 2 blocks. I want to go and like have interesting conversations and relationships one way or the other. I want to connect with people and feel that life and that energy. So in that Turkish conversation, it was like, how do I say awesome? It was like harika or cool or whatever. I still remember, even though I don't speak Turkish at all. Like that was just one experiment like 2 years ago, but I still remember harika. It's something like that for like cool or awesome. And I asked her, how do I say just kidding? And how do I say thank you? Because these are things that were like high frequency things in the conversation, because I could use them. We'd be speaking English and there would be so many opportunities where I could just say, oh, harika, like in the middle of the English conversation, throw in some Turkish, or like kind of flirt and like joke and then say, just kidding. Or I could even learn, I don't know if I asked her in that case or not, but I could even learn like more like kind of ridiculous things like I love you, I hate you, haha, like whatever. Just like learn a bunch of words that are fun for whatever your situation is, and then go talk with people. Or wait longer if you're really shy and you really don't want to do it, or it's going to be bad for you if it goes wrong, like, or it's hard to meet native speakers. Then again, you can do stuff more through content without actually having as many conversations, and you can go create conversations on your own and you can have fun with it. The point is, even if you suck, like everyone does at the beginning, it can still be fun and enjoyable depending on your perspective. You can play with it. It doesn't have to be a boring studying for a test, learning, memorizing all this stuff and so much stress. It can be something you play with. So I got into it again. I went deep. I think you said something about perfectionism, and I said, let me tell something quick and then I'll list the other errors. So I think that was my something quick about perfectionism right there. So there's a lot more detail. So again, errors. I talked about going away from right and wrong earlier and to focus more on utility, pattern alignment, goals, that sort of thing, effectiveness. So even talking about mistakes and errors is an interesting thing to look at.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. If you liked this podcast, please share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave a review. This really helps the podcast to grow. I would love to hear your feedback about the show. Feel free to send me a message on Instagram. Now, I have an invitation for you. If you want to practice your English and you don't have anybody else to talk with, you can join our global community on Telegram. Every month, I organize a video group call on Zoom for us to hang out. In there, you can meet new people, make new friends, and practice your English while having fun. If you can't use Telegram, don't worry. Keep an eye on Instagram because I always make stories about our encounters. I'll include links to all the resources that we mentioned in the show notes. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.